Up to now, we've only used an application by itself. Module 6, we're going to look at how we add services to an application. So when we look at the catalogue, you'll see there are quite a number of services within Bluemix. And if you're on the command line, you can also see that catalogue using the CF Marketplace command. And that allows you to see what services are available. For an application to use a service, it first needs to bind to a service. So I can do that from the user interface, or I can do it from the command line with the bind service, the BS command. Once I've attached a service to an application, I then need to work out how the application can talk to that service. And the way that Bluemix achieves this is by setting an environment variable called vCap services. That environment variable will hold a JSON document. So to understand what services are bound to my application and get things like the credentials to access that service, I need to parse out the JSON that's in that vCap services environment variable. From the Bluemix user interface, you can actually see the content of that environment variable by opening up an application and then switching to the environment variables tab as shown on the slide. Parsing out the environment variable in most languages is fairly simple. JSON is becoming the common format for REST APIs, so most languages will have a way or a library to parse out a JSON string. I put some samples on the slide here. Again, no error checking to make it simple, but you'll see that it's quite easy to parse out that JSON document. And what you're usually looking for is the credential section, because that's where you will get the information of how I access the service, what host it's on, what port it's on, any user ID and password. One thing to note, if you're using a Java runtime, then there are some capabilities built into the Java runtime, the Liberty runtime, that will automatically configure your Java application server to add the configuration needed for certain services. And you can get that information from the documentation on the Java Liberty build pack. One important thing to remember though is when you're using services, you need to be able to test your code, and you don't want unit tests to actually go outside of Bluemix and test the functionality of the service. So you can think of the public API as a contract. As a consumer, you are going to write code to that contract, that API contract. And when you unit test, what you need to do is just test your code is sticking to that contract. So I don't care about whether the call works or not. I'm just checking that I use the API. I stick to the contract. And there are test frameworks that provide capabilities. They're often called mocks or stubs, and sometimes called test doubles, where I'm actually going to prevent the call to the external service, but I'm going to verify that I'm actually using the API correctly. And you need to adopt those frameworks within your unit tests. We've just looked at how we consume a service on Bluemix, but the other aspect to Bluemix is that you can actually create services on Bluemix. There are two types of service you can create. One is a private service, which is private to your organization. And these can act as placeholders to external services. It allows your application to consume a service as if it was a Bluemix service, even though it's not a Bluemix service. So you create a service and you provide a set of properties that will be available to the application when the application is bound to that service. The other type of service you can create is a public service. This is where you go through a process and become part of the catalog in Bluemix. And the way you do this is by getting into the IBM Cloud Marketplace. So customers are really changing how they're buying IT. In our personal lives, we've changed how we buy music, how we buy books, how we switch to online shopping. With IT services, we're seeing a similar change. People are now looking to buy online. And the IBM Marketplace is a one-stop shop for IBM services, but also for our partner services, whether it's on SoftLayer or Bluemix or one of our other cloud platforms. All of the applications can live in our IBM Cloud Marketplace. As a business partner, you can actually add your application, your service to that marketplace. There are a number of qualifying criteria that you need to satisfy before you can get into the marketplace. And if you follow the link on this slide, you'll get to a presentation which takes you through all of the details in terms of what the qualification criteria are to actually become a partner. And then we have a fairly simple process that's shown on this slide of how you actually go through and become a cloud marketplace partner and how you can get your service onto the Bluemix catalog. There are a number of links on this slide to take you to the relevant pages and documentation. So to wrap up Module 6, we've seen how an application can consume a service by having the service bound to it. And once bound, the application can look at the JSON document in the VCAP services environment variable to access that service. We've looked at how you can create a private service where you can create almost a proxy service to link to an external service, but have the application think it's a local Bluemix service. We've also then looked at how you can take your service into the Bluemix catalog by using the IBM Cloud Marketplace.